Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for your second act of the first half? Let's keep those energy levels really high. This man is from the most important university in the entire universe. Straight from UCL, it's Matt Paskins!
Hello, thank you very much. I had the great pleasure of welcoming lots of people in to come to the Congress. I was wearing a purple t-shirt, I was volunteering, I wasn't doing very well. Volunteers, yeah. It's like they've cheered themselves. It's really enchanting, it's like they're representing volunteers wearing purple t-shirts. I wish I'd be in the gang again, but I'm not. I was really very bad at it because I didn't know where anything is in Manchester. So I spent a lot of time watching and a certain amount of time smiling, and those were the two main things that I did. And it was lovely watching everyone sort of arrive at the Congress because all the geologists arrived in a bus. Because they're just better organised than other historians of science. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And of all the various delegates here, it was wonderful seeing people from arrive from all over the world and seeing old friends, seeing people that I primarily associate with bibliographies actually being alive. And the sort of, the very confusing kind of relation between people and books, very difficult. But among all these people, by far my favourite delegate at the whole Congress was a 5-year-old boy wearing a very solemn t-shirt which said "Happy Visitor" and cradling a tiny red motorcycle. And I thought, oh good, my panel's been accepted. And what my panel was going to be was a series of 5-year-old boys with different kind of vehicles, all of them offering the opportunity to each other to say which one was the best, and their own one would be the best because it was theirs. But you get a chance. I mean, it's a field that I'm interested in, but I'm very much an outsider in relation to what small boys think about small kind of wooden vehicles. It's sad for me. It's sad for all of us really. But it would be interesting to find out if a fire engine was better than a truck or a motorcycle. But the panel wasn't actually happening. There are 888,000 parallel sessions occurring at this Congress, but there's none about small boys showing fire engines. Well, not formally. So that's not happening. And in any case, I'm no longer a part of the field. Our research has I suppose moved on in a certain sense. So what I started thinking about was my favourite book of 18th century educational theory. Because if you pay your £2 to come to Bright Club, that's the kind of segue that you get. My favourite book of 18th century educational theory is by the great Anglo-Irish inventor Richard Lovell Edgeworth and his even greater daughter, Maria Edgeworth, the novelist. And it really is very windy on the stage. It's quite striking. So the book is by Richard Lovell Edgeworth and Maria Edgeworth. It's called Practical Education, and rather satisfyingly from the point of view of the link that I'm trying to make with the first thing that I was talking about, it's full of really, really hating wheel carriages, because the Edgeworths are absolutely preoccupied with the idea that what is most important about toys is that you should be able to break them, and if you can't break them, you should at least be able to use them. And for this reason, they think there's nothing more disgusting than a wheel carriage whose wheels don't go round. And there's dark passages in, there's dark passages in Practical Education about wheel carriages whose wheels don't go round, who've got passengers that aren't real people. They're just little painted people who don't have eyes because they just paint eyes, and they don't get to do anything, and they're a bit like adults. And they're a bit like adults because all they want to do is to go to tea parties, and they want to play cards, and they want to compare wigs, and in some sense they want to be involved in some kind of process that is in some sense corrupt, or that is remote from what could be learned from actually smashing something apart and making its wheels go round and round and round. The preoccupation with the way in which the ways that adults speak to children could corrupt them is something that runs all the way through the Edgeworth's educational writing. In a certain haunting passage in Practical Education, they say that custom has the right, the prescriptive right to talk nonsense. Custom has the prescriptive right to talk nonsense. And this is in the midst of a discussion about whether or not you could create a perfect language, whether you could actually repair the way in which you speak about things. And they say of this idea that none but a philosopher would create a perfect language, and none but a philosopher would want one. In this discussion, their example is the chemical revolution, the attempt to transform chemical nomenclature, to rationalise it in some way. And they say, well, that's not worked, has it? So how the hell do you expect to talk about wigs and wheel carriages in a way that would actually connect in a meaningful way to human life? Because custom has a prescriptive right to talk nonsense. And this theme plays out all the way through, particularly Maria's later work. She wrote a magnificent series of children's stories, initially again in collaboration with her family, but later by herself. These are the Harry and Lucy tales, some of the very greatest stories about science ever written for children, in my view. Also, the stories written for children which feature the most extended references to the inventive career of Humphrey Davy, and that's not necessarily something to actually read to your own children unless you're sat over there. The Harry and Lucy tales are about a pair of siblings growing up together and learning from each other about how to invent, how to see the world around them and make sense of its everyday properties in a way which might one day, if they're very good, lead them to invent something as good as the safety lamp of Humphrey Davy. That's really the greatest thing that is imaginable for either of these kids, which in certain senses, I think the guy who had his motorcycles, things have moved on. But Harry and Lucy are learning from each other all the time, and Harry is literal and pretty slow-witted, but very, very keen that he knows how to build a bridge, even though he doesn't, and his bridge is shit, and his bridge falls apart about 3 times before he sort of raggedly stays up over and says, "Oh, Harry, your bridge is amazing." It's not a good bridge. It's just rubbish. And Harry spent a lot of time reading encyclopedias and saying, "Hello, Lucy, did you know that Henry Cater invented a hygrometer that was based on the principles of grass responding to the atmospheric moisture? And did you know, Lucy, that's a little bit like when your hair coils?" And Lucy says, "Really, Harry? That's extremely interesting, because Lucy is a character in a children's book and that's how she talks." But that's not the only way that Lucy talks. There's other ways that Lucy talks as well, because she's full of wordplay and wit and nonsense. As the great feminist critic Mitzi Myers pointed out, Lucy is all the time trying to subvert what Harry's saying, taking it in another direction, pointing out to him that his words can't mean exactly what he wants them to. They're always flying off, not exactly being corrupted, but playing, going somewhere else. And while Lucy is teaching Harry that his words can't be as solid and predictable as the stones from which he builds his rubbish bridge, she's also being taught her own terrible lessons about what adult life is going to be like, because custom has a prescriptive right to talk nonsense. So towards the end of the Harry and Lucy stories, in fact, while Harry is building his terrible bridge, he says to Lucy, "I'm sorry, Lucy, you can't help me with my bridge because you're not strong enough, Lucy, because you're a girl." And Lucy says, "Oh, really, Harry? That's extremely interesting. Thank you for telling me." And all the way through that, it's very, very difficult to tell whether Lucy's already maybe come to believe it, and whether Harry's speaking to something which is there actually because his sister's tired and he does love her, even though he's pretty dim and he doesn't really know what he's saying, or whether he's just talking nonsense because custom has the script. And right at the end of the Harry and Lucy stories, there's a famous passage. So the Harry and Lucy stories had very wide readership. Queen Victoria was a very big fan of them, and she tried to write her own version of them, which is not good. So they had a very wide readership, and they weren't necessarily read in the sort of slightly subversive, slightly uncertain way that I do think it's there, this uncertainty, this strange relationship between the children, and where Lucy's trying to protect Harry while at the same time she's being educated into a role which is going to limit her, which is going to destroy possibilities of her own inventive faculties, which is going to reduce her. And right towards the end, Lucy's mother more or less explicitly tells her that this is how things are going to go. But of course, Lucy's mother's an adult, so what does she know? And what Lucy's mother says is that you're not going to be able to play these games in the way that you've been used to for much longer, you two children, and you're going to have to get used to that. But at a certain point, Lucy, what you will be able to do for your brother, even though you won't be able to play with him and event with him and dream with him anymore, is you will be able to be his companion, and that's got to be good enough. And Lucy's response to this is, you can read it one of two ways. Either she learns that lesson and she becomes the good early 19th century woman that it intends to make her, or, my preferred reading, she doesn't listen at all, and there is evidence for this in the text, because her response to this good moral lesson from her mother is, look, what's that? What's that over there? Oh look, it's Harry, he's got a walking stick. Oh, that's amazing, Harry's got a walking stick. Why has he got that funny walking stick? It doesn't look like any walking stick I've ever seen. Oh no, it's not a walking stick, I think it's a barometer. I'm going to go and do some measurements with Harry, mother. Which seems to hold out the possibility that Harry and Lucy might still have a few games to play together. All the way through these kinds of readings, these kinds of attempts to recover little bits of unheard idea or little bits of possibility, little bits of things that might go a little bit differently against the fact that custom has the prescriptive right to talk nonsense, you have the terror that you're over-reading, you're over-analysing, you're over-interpreting. What the Harry and Lucy stories and what all of the educational writings of the Edgeworths were preoccupied with was the idea of occupation, what it means to form from your working life and from your connection with the world a life which could possibly make sense for you, and that would be fulfilling, renewing, and allow you to live in a community which worked. There's a moment in the correspondence between Maria Edgeworth, the author, and one of her friends, an American woman named Rachel Mordecai Lazarus, where Rachel Mordecai Lazarus describes reading the Harry and Lucy stories. And she says at the end of the letter that reading your stories, my dear Miss Edgeworth, I always felt that the children were real. And so when I put the book aside at last, it was a long time before I could return to my usual occupation. And there's something in that little pause, that little wanting something else, I found quite good. And I quite wanted, when I read that letter, for Rachel Mordecai Lazarus to have written it, and to have looked up, and to see someone coming over the horizon maybe, with something which might just about have been a walking stick, but might also have been a barometer. Thank you very much indeed.
Paskins, ladies and gentlemen.